For our thermal unit project, we will be investigating the Japanese honeybee and their unique defensive tactic. Because their stingers are too small to pierce the exoskeleton of the predators, they must rely on a different technique. The Japanese honeybee uses its famous heat ball to protect themselves from invading giant hornets, who are much larger in size. As the name suggests, these bees essentially cook their predators alive by collectively increasing their body temperature in swarms up to 500 bees. How is this extra heat produced? Once the bees form a tight ball around the hornet, they begin to rapidly vibrate their wing muscles, and additionally release high amounts of carbon dioxide towards the center of the ball. Lasting roughly 30 minutes, they can raise the temperature up to 46 degrees Celsius, or 114.8 degrees Fahrenheit. While the hornet cannot handle this high temperature, the bees have adapted special brain cells to regulate this heat and tolerate it. For our project, we'll be performing some calculations on this process, and to estimate the speed that their wings must move at, using the equations and concepts learned from class. Our parameters for these bee were estimated using the sources and literature. A typical Japanese honeybee is 75 milligrams, with a surface area of 3.27 centimeters squared, and body temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. The effective wind mass is 3.75 milligrams, and it vibrates at a frequency of 230 Hz. In addition, we will also be attempting to recreate this process by using our hands to model the bees, although our results may be affected by high levels of error.
Okay, so a task to find the velocity of the wing of the Japanese honeybee was performing its heat ball. So first here, we have the heat generated by flapping the wings, and this is the heat that the bee's temperature rises, which is why we have mc delta T over T, and then this becomes nmc delta T over T, since the total mass is the, number of bees times the mass of the individual ones. And then here we have the convection equation and radiation equation for power, which we know from class, and then we use convection because we're surrounded by air, and then radiation because, you always use radiation, right? And then here, now we have to calculate the area of the overall ball itself. So given the area of each, surface area of each individual bee, we can calculate the radius and thus the volume of it, which we could then use to based on the optimal volume using Kepler's conjecture, which is just sphere pecking in 3D space, to find the volume of the optimized sphere, and then find the radius, and then eventually the surface area of the total ball. And now here, the mechanical power is, just the efficiency times the total power, and the total power is from before, just the three types of heat loss added together. So we get this equation here. But we also know that mechanical power is just nothing but kinetic energy times frequency, since we're assuming that all the mechanical power is just the wing flapping, right? So we solve this just to find velocity here, and then plug in our formula for mechanical power below, and we get this large equation, and then we just plug this in to find velocity is about 2 meters per second.
We began by following lab protocol and putting on safety goggles. Our group set out to simulate bees by rubbing our hands, while a cup of cold water stood in for the hornet. We used a heat gun to record temperatures before and after. To compare results, we ran both a control and an experimental group. Using the scales, we first measured the empty cups. The control cup weighed 4.17 grams, and the experimental cup weighed 4.1 grams. After filling them with water, the totals came to 51.12 grams for the control and 32.92 grams for the experimental. So the mass of the water was 46.95 grams and 28.82 grams, respectively. The initial temperature of the cold water was 19 degrees Celsius. We left the control cup undisturbed at room temperature around 24 degrees Celsius. For the experimental cup, we rubbed our hands together and positioned them so heat would transfer across the entire surface of the cup, continuing this for 20 minutes. Afterward, the control cup measured 20 degrees Celsius and the experimental cup measured 22 degrees Celsius, showing a 1 degree rise for the control versus a 3 degree rise for the experimental setup. These results indicate that our bee imitation can raise temperature. However, the exact measurements are somewhat prone to error due to the heat gun and other environmental factors that we faced in the lab.
The Japanese honeybee is not the only species that utilizes similar strategies where they group up in order to produce heat. One example is penguins, which huddle together in order to conserve heat in the harsh climate. They differ in that while Japanese honeybees actively produce heat, similarly to the hand rubbing in the experiment, penguins rely on metabolic heat in the reduction of exposed surface area instead. This, paired with features that increase insulation, allows them to conserve heat. One such characteristic is their dense overlapping feathers, which create air pockets within the layers. Since air is a poor conductor of heat, the heat transfers through the feathers much slower than it would through flesh with convection. Another example is musk oxen. In order to protect the calves in cold weather, musk oxen can form tight defensive rings, where their adults will use the bodies to block the wind from reaching the young in the middle, and to create a warmer environment through body heat. This behavior is extremely common with animals that live in large groups, as it is a very effective way to conserve energy in harsh conditions, in addition to being a defensive mechanism.